領域展開看護を上げて不完全ブサイクのいいとこだ
Chimera Shadow Garden, incomplete and ugly work at best. This is the first time Megumi had used his creativity to expand the works of his jujutsu abilities. Expanding on the foundation of his 10 Shadows technique, the magnitude of darkness is like no other, nothing divine or resembling perfection. Chimera Shadow Garden is a manifestation of Megumi Fushiguro's dark inhibitions to be better, his last resort to level the playing field. Its true resonance amongst the jujutsu world can only be described as one thing: terrifying. But before we get into explaining Megumi's domain expansion, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit that notification bell to stay updated with my latest uploads. This video will contain spoilers from the manga. Seeing his domain expansion at full work 3 times in the manga, he has definitely had his fair share of chances to show off what it's capable of, but due to it being such a complicated technique, even more so if your name is Hikari, I think analysing all its features and history will go a long way in helping us to understand the entire depth of his magnificent domain expansion. The Chimera Shadow Garden truly is terrifying, but it's frightening to know that it is still incomplete. So why do we jump inside of Megumi's domain expansion? To start things off, let's first understand what Chimera Shadow Garden means. In Japanese it is called Kango Anyete, and surprisingly its translation is rather close to the one we receive, acting almost like a paradox with its name. Chimera has multiple meanings, which both encapsulate Megumi to a T, the first of which stems from the legends of Greek mythology. A chimera is a beast of many features, inspired by a plentiful amount of creatures with a lion's head, goat's body and the tail of a serpent. It is a legendary beast that breathes fire, and although not a direct mirror to his technique, this seems to be a part of the inspiration for Megumi's Shikigami and his 10 Shadows technique. His Shikigami are able to evolve with each other after being exercised, as we've noticed with his totality ability, so it makes sense as to why his domain expansion contains the word chimera. The other meaning represents either a dream or fantasy that's out of reach, although in this case nightmare would seem more fitting with the disturbing imagery surrounding his domain expansion. It is another perfect encapsulation of Megumi as a person, often up against the odds. In the fantastical world of JJK, he seems to meet those odds even with the growing steps. Now as for the word shadow, it seems clear that it is merely the extension of his 10 Shadows technique and the dark abyss it takes as a form. And lastly, for garden, I personally think this is supposed to represent the realm in which the Shikigami live, a dark desolate shadow that a poor soul is thrust into when they're caught up by his technique, further emphasized by the various life forms that live in everyday gardens. So with that said, Chimera Shadow Garden is potentially a domain expansion that is not new to the series by any means, with the 10 Shadows being an inherited technique of the Zenin family, worth a small fortune to them for the chance of bringing it back into the family. The full power of this technique has yet to be explored, and although it can only be speculated about, the true power is definitely something that will shock the jujutsu world. Although it has only been brought out in its full glory twice in the series so far, what we've seen so far was enough to scare even a finger bearer. When activated, it's like a flood of darkness that drowns any sort of light, enshrouding himself and whoever he traps in the depths of his despair. Chimera Shadow Garden's flooring feels like a restless soul, harboring all the Shikigami Megumi has at his disposal, acting as though they cannot quite manifest themselves. However, due to his lack of experience or perhaps potential, we notice that his domain does not create its own environment or barrier. Rather, coming from his feet, it seems to extend into the real world, as it creates a confusing atmosphere that is exceptional at disorienting the manifested and real worlds. In it, the manifestation of his toads latch on to you in swarms, although not much else beside his flood of shadows appears at first. With his progress in his training as well as his constant battles, Megumi's domain seems to be growing like its own character. This wouldn't be seen until he unleashes his new power against Reggie. Here it appears as though its reach is incomparable to what it once was, and what should be noticed is that this time, it harbors a more fulfilled and complete look with less flaws, and accompanying Megumi in his domain is an inanimate object that resembles something from the body, like a vertebrae or nervous system trying to spread its control. So this begs the question, how exactly is Megumi's domain expansion evolving, and what exactly is it evolving into? Well, as stated before, Megumi's shadow seems to always be an extension of himself. Everything seems to be interconnected, so no one could describe Megumi's domain expansion as the visage of his very being, someone who outwardly appears to be doing alright, that thrives in the blinding abyss. Now with that out of the way, let's finally dive into what you've all been waiting for, and that is the Chimera Shadow Garden's power and effect as a domain expansion. Being an extension of the shadow that is Megumi's curse technique, a lot of what we see from Megumi by his own words is just the extension of his 10 shadows ability. But one unique factor of this particular domain expansion is that if a sorcerer is unable to regulate their feet with cursed energy, they'll ceaselessly flow through the dark abyss and suffocate in the endless shadow. This is a magnificent addition to his arsenal, as occupying enemies with this sort of weakness goes a long way in giving Megumi the edge in battle. To top this off, being the environment in which he can go all out and be at his best, Megumi is able to freely use his hand-to-hand combat skills to get the upper hand. He is also assisted by the shadow and endless army of Shikigami that act as both a distraction and restraint. Another unique thing to this realm is Megumi stealing from Naruto and performing the shadow clone jutsu. Using the shadow to create a perfect copy of himself, Chimera Shadow Garden's seemingly greatest weapon is the fear and doubt it ensnares its victims in. Capitalizing on the confusion it can bring about, Megumi with his seamless creativity had developed something that complements his every move. Not to mention, as we had seen when he had fought the finger bearer during the death painting arc, these Shikigami, although they were mere clones, seem to hold a power that rivals its original user, and can deal damage that is enough to hurt a special grade. Although it was impressive to see Megumi's growth over such a short period of time, the more impressive showcase of his domain expansion came during the Shibuya incident arc, where he alone gave Maki, Nanami and Naobito a fighting chance against Dagon. A late comer to the fight, Chimera Shadow Garden was powerful enough to contest for the likes of this special grade's very own domain expansion, and although realizing in a battle of this caliber he would surely lose, he was versatile enough to create a hole for escape inside Dagon's domain expansion. Although it didn't work as planned, it ended up being the sole reason for their survival. Now while both those were impressive displays of his power, it would not be until the Culling Games that we first get a glimpse at the heights Megumi is destined to reach. Aware of all of his flaws and inabilities, again like his previous domain expansion, Megumi would make the environment around him become his domain. Although it didn't have the one-shot technique like most other domain expansions, it did manage to improve the ability of his 10 shadows technique, allowing him to release 120% of his maximum potential, and with this drastic improvement, his cloning ability had far surpassed what it once was, managing to edge out a narrow victory against Reggie. This would be the last time we would see the Chimera Shadow Garden, but I have a feeling when we see it next, it is going to continue growing in power. Now while in all honesty Megumi's domain expansion seems to be lackluster in comparison to the others we've seen before his, the simple nature of harboring the dark is what makes it such a fascinating conception for a power in a series like Jujutsu Kaisen, as it's not very often you have a hero being the one that dwells in the dark. But what intrigues me even more is Akutami's use of Megumi as a crux to see the development of a Jujutsu technique that is of this higher caliber of power, because as cool as he is, Megumi still is only a first year student after all, and has many years left to go before he reaches his peak. I would say it would take him years, but it's Megumi we are talking about. As we've already seen, he has the capability of learning at an incredible rate, and takes strides that are unlike any other we've ever seen. So with this knowledge I can only come to one conclusion, and that is that Megumi is destined to have a domain expansion that could rival even Satoru Gojo's. Because when we consider the 2 times we've seen it as a fully realized concept, there are a couple things that stand out to me. With a lack of a barrier, Megumi uses the crux of an environment to act as one for him, which sounds somewhat similar to the likes of Malevolent Shrine, the other of which is that it is evolving in more than the traditional sense. Something like himself is growing. Megumi is becoming a monster, or at the very least developing one. And what I believe that monster is a Gasha Dokuro, a monster linked to the history of Japan during the Heian period, which could be why Sukuna has such a fascination with him, and for more evidence look no further than the very name of his domain expansion. Gasha Dokuros, which are skeletal monsters that strive around the darkest hours of night and are both perceived as invincible and invisible, which by the legend is too believed can only be fought against by sorcerers themselves. Like with the history of Sukuna, we know that Gege Akutami likes to draw inspiration from real life history and artifacts, and something with such a history seems like it is perfect for the arsenal of Megumi. So why is it that I bring this up? Well, I solemnly believe that while the divine unstoppable power of Maharaga is magnificent, I don't believe that he stands at the top of the Shikigami that Megumi will come to possess. only knowing of 6 so far that he has tamed. I think amongst the long history of the Zenin family, he will be the Satoru Gojo of their namesake, and this will come to be through his mastery of his own domain expansion and conquering all 10 Shikigami part of his 10 Shadows technique. Now with that being said, that brings today's video to an end. I'm curious to know what you believe is behind Megumi's domain expansion in his fight against Reggie. Do you think that Mahoraga is a sample of the true power he actually holds? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As always, like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys in the next one.